So going through the technical and the mystical and the psychological aspect of the Seder is absolutely imperative. Because although we've celebrated Pesach many times before, and we've either made a Seder or attended a Seder, nevertheless our sages advise us that every year, 30 days prior to a holiday, we must start learning the necessary laws and traditions and the concentration, the focuses, in order to be able to tap in to the energy that is found and contained and is available to enrich our lives during that particular holiday. As we mentioned before, many times people walk in and out of a holiday like walking in and out of a gold mine, a diamond mine, but in their mind, they don't even know that it's a gold mine or diamond mine. They think it's just another cave. So they walk into this cave saying, I've already seen many caves. This cave is very interesting. And they look around and they walk right back out, not realizing how much wealth and treasures are there right beneath the surface if they chisel a little bit, if they search a little bit. And for this very reason, every holiday must be observed according to its statutes, according to its laws, according to traditions and concentrations. Pesach, Zman Cherutenu, the time of our liberation, as we learned last week, is the holiday in which Hashem comes into every one of our homes, every single one of our consciousness, and draws us out from our own personal slavery, our own personal paro. What is that? The part of ourselves which is called the ego, the animal soul, the Yetzer Hara, that holds us down, that prevents us from moving forward in our lives, that prevents us from probing deep within ourselves and discovering the truth of how liberated and holy we are. And for this very reason, Pesach is not just another meal, but rather a prescribed order. As we learned last week, that in order to achieve this transcendence, there are steps, there are traditions that we must observe. So let's begin with the 15 steps. Step number 1 is called Kadesh. Right before this, however, I'm sorry, I just jumped. Right before this, to remind the women that we light the candles. This over here in Great Neck is, the first night is 7:25 p.m. And we cannot have matzah until around 8:12 p.m. We can't really start our Seder before nightfall, which is around 8:12 p.m. If for whatever reason you must start the Seder earlier, we nevertheless cannot have the matzah before 8:12 p.m. because otherwise it's not a mitzvah. That this eating the matzah, as we're going to see, is actually the mitzvah of the night. And it's the mitzvah of Pesach. Prior to nightfall, it's not yet fully Pesach. So the first night we light Shabbat candles, 7:25. We say the bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu ladlik ner shel Yom Tov. And immediately following that, both nights we say Shehechiyanu. The ladies say Shehechiyanu v'kiyemanu v'giyanu zman hazeh, thanking God for bringing us and delivering us alive and well into this holiday. The last 2 nights of Pesach, we do not make a Shehechiyanu. The ladies do not make a Shehechiyanu, nor do the men make a Shehechiyanu in the Kiddush, because the last 2 nights of Pesach are a direct continuation and extension from the first 2 nights, as we're going to speak later on. It is a tradition and very important that ladies give a few sentences dakah before lighting Shabbat candles, as a zgula for all that's good.
We light the candles and we give tzedakah here as well.
What do you mean here?
The first 2 nights.
Yes, including the last 2 nights. Before the ladies light Shabbat candles, as so long as it's not, sometimes Yom Tov begins, Yom Tov also begins on Shabbat, and then we don't give it before lighting candles. But nevertheless, when we light candles, I'm sorry, Motzei Shabbat. In other words, sometimes there's a Yom Tov begins Motzei Shabbat, so we're going directly from Shabbat to Yom Tov, and therefore we're not allowed to touch money.
The first 2 nights, I'm sorry.
But in this year, the first 2 nights fall on a weekday, so the first night falls on a weekday, and therefore we should give tzedakah the first night. The second night we do not, because the second night it's Yom Tov, we're not allowed to touch money. It's muksa. But you could give tzedakah by giving a compliment to your husbands, to your children, saying a nice thing, something. It's always, tzedakah comes in many different forms.
And the last 2 nights we don't.
No. Well, the last 2 nights, again, if being that the last night, when is the last night, the first of the second 2 days? If it's on a weekday, then prior to lighting the candles, we give tzedakah. The second night we don't, because we're going from Yom Tov to Yom Tov, and we're not allowed to touch the money. Okay. Now, the first 2 nights of Pesach, the men say the full Hallel after concluding the Amidah in Ma'ariv. The full set of Tehillim in which we thank God for the Exodus and the splitting of the sea. The first section of the Hallel. The second section of the Hallel is thanking God for the future miracles, for the redemption, and so on and so forth. So the first 2 nights, the men say the complete Hallel after Ma'ariv in Shul. By the time the men should come home, and again, as we learned last week, the men are advised not to hang out in Shul, not to talk, because they must come home as early as possible in order to begin the Seder on time so the children won't fall asleep. It is advisable for the children, especially younger children, to take a nap throughout the day so they'll have the strength to remain up throughout the night. And again, we're going to incentivize the children by offering them presents and so on and so forth, that we're going to be speaking about, in order to encourage them to stay and remain by the table and stay awake and participate as there's many questions and so on and so forth. Because as we mentioned before, the aim of Seder is not to recall the Exodus, that we accomplish every single day, twice daily, both in Shacharit and Aravit, in the 3rd paragraph of the Shema, when we say, I'm God your Lord who took you out of Egypt, and saying that and thinking about that, and especially, and then also, as well as the subsequent paragraphs after the Shema in both Shacharit and Aravit, we recall the Exodus, we recall the splitting of the sea, etc., etc. So the Pesach Seder is not there to remember the Exodus, but rather to relay, to tell the story to the children, to transmit our tradition, ourselves to the next generation. This is a perfect convergence, a coming together of past, present, and future. As we, being a link, a present link to all the past, that links all the previous generations that came before us to the subsequent, to the children. Otherwise, the children don't know who they are, as we're going to discuss soon. So it's so important to make the Seder as experiential as possible, to make it very interactive as possible. For the plagues, for example, some people buy these little frogs and little locusts, and when they speak about the plagues during the Magid, they start throwing frogs all around. And, in other words, you want to get the kids excited and so on and so forth. It's so important. It's so important. It's important, as we're going to see, to tell our own stories throughout the Seder, not just to relay the story of the Exodus in the year 2448, but to tell our own stories, our family stories, when we immigrated and so on and so forth, that we're going to discuss soon. By the time the father comes home, by the time the men come home for the Seder table should be prepared. Primarily, that the ke'ara, the Seder plate, should already be set up. Now over here, there's a difference between the first night and the second night. The first night we're allowed to prepare it, being that it's the first night it's a mundane day technically. So you're allowed to prepare the Seder plate the table before sunset already. But we're not allowed to prepare from one Yom Tov to another. So we're not allowed to technically set up the Seder table, or we shouldn't technically set up the Seder plate before sunset and before lighting the Shabbos candle, which is around 8:12 the second night. In other words, we're not allowed to prepare from the first day, on the first day, like let's just say if Pesach is on Tuesday, during the daytime, we're not allowed to prepare the Seder plate Tuesday afternoon for Wednesday night for the second night of Seder. But rather we wait until after we light the candles and then we start preparing. If for whatever reason a woman needs to prepare the food throughout the day, which is again a technical issue because you're not supposed to prepare the night before, the day before for the next night. So what you could do is from each food that you're preparing, eat a little bit of the food. Incidentally, and it's very important to put over here, that one of the main differences between Shabbat and Yom Tov, as Pesach is a Yom Tov, is that on Shabbat we're allowed to transfer fires. We're not allowed to ignite a fire on Yom Tov. In other words, you're not allowed to turn on a match or a lighter, or the oven you're not allowed to turn on. We are allowed to transfer fire from a pre-existing fire. So, for example, the second night of Yom Tov, we light the candles from a pre-existing fire. Either a person has a very big yortzeit candle, a candle that burns for 25 hours, or some people have a 40-hour candle, 70, but they have a big one, so they could just transfer the fire from that to that. And we should definitely have the fire on the stove on the range turn on minimally, so if we need to cook, we could cook upon it and transfer fire to the other, so long as when we turn on the gas, the electric doesn't turn on, because even though you're going to just go right past the electric just for the gas, so you could transfer fire from one pre-existing fire to the stove. But nevertheless, if you're turning on the electric, you turn on electric. So, if that's the case, turn off the electric part of the oven, or have whatever fires you need at a minimum. That's what we do over here. And we're allowed to increase the fire on Yom Tov, but we're not allowed to turn off or decrease the fire on Yom Tov. Therefore, anyone who smokes on Yom Tov is not allowed to ash their cigarettes or turn off the cigarette. If somebody smokes, they're only allowed to they have to have the ashes ash by themselves. You're not allowed to ash it. You're not allowed to extinguish it. If the time a person is finishing, they just need to put the cigarette gently on the floor, and that's it.
So you can hold whatever it is up to the...
Yes. However, regarding smoking, it's not advisable to smoke on Yom Tov if you don't have to. And on Pesach, there's a question if we're allowed to smoke cigarettes altogether, because there are many, many chemicals over there which contains traces of possibly chametz, kidney. There's all kinds of issues with it. So even if a person is a smoker, they should try to abstain throughout the week of Pesach.
I'm really sorry. I know you said it's like you can increase the fire in Yom Tov, but you can't decrease it?
Yes. Okay. It is a tradition, and it's actually brought in Shulchan Aruch, that the husband should buy something nice, a dress, a piece of jewelry for their wives and their daughters before Pesach, before all three festivals, that is, before Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And before we begin, the order in itself, it's important to emphasize something we already spoke about in previous classes, that the Arizal, the famed Kabbalist, that is accepted by all walks of Judaism as the foremost Kabbalist that we follow his tradition of Kabbalah, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, who's buried in Tzfat, explains that the way we conduct the Seder is the ultimate key to achieving personal liberty. We ought to do the Seder with happiness, singing, and in good spirits, reading the Haggadah with extra measure of chayut, of excitement, and so on and so forth. We have to be very joyful. There's a tradition that we bring out the best silverware we have, even if we're not going to use it, and put it all around the Seder in order to show that this is a night of luxury, of wealth. As our sages in the Talmud says, Ein aniyut b'makom hashirut, one should not conduct themselves in an impoverished way in a rich setting. That even when they would give, the Talmud says that even when they would hydrate the sheep for the korban tamid, for the daily offerings, they would hydrate it out of a golden bowl. Why? Because to show luxury. Technically, what's the difference? What's the sheep are drinking from? They're drinking. But again, you want to show luxury. This is so much more true during the Pesach. To have the most nicest of dishes, obviously they have to be kosher to Pesach, and even if we're not going to use them, like candelabras and stuff like that, it's like stuff that we don't use, but they're silver, we should still have them out. And if we do, we have to make sure they're kosher, obviously for Pesach, so that we cleaned out all the utensils from any trace chametz, and we kash it if we need to. Okay, let's move to the Seder. Step number 1 of the Seder is Kaddish, which means to sanctify. In step number 1, each one of us fills the entire cup of Kiddush, the entire becher, the entire Kiddush cup, with wine. Optimally, it should be red wine. According to mystical traditions, red wine is more significant than white wine, unless you have a white wine which is even more tastier, or you don't have a preference for the red and you genuinely like the white, then it's okay to do it over the white. It's very important to insert over here that I've seen this, unfortunately, that people go to the kosher, the liquor stores here on Middle Neck Road and other liquor stores, and they mistake it to think that just because it's owned by a Jew, and it has a wide array of choices of wine, of kosher wine, that all the wine in the store is kosher. And I've seen this happen, unfortunately, several times with very good families, that someone brought them wine and didn't check it was kosher. And they unfortunately conducted their Seder over non-kosher wine. We know that grape juice and wine, any juice that comes from grape has to be kosher, more than any other juices, because grape juice and wine is as we spoke about yesterday, reveals the inside. That's why every one of our traditional ceremonies is performed over wine, because the wine reveals the inside. As we said yesterday, nichnas yain yotze sod. In Hebrew, the word wine, yain, is equal to 70. And in Hebrew, the word sod, which means secret, numerologically is equal to 70. Our sage says when wine comes in, secrets come out. Wine reveals that which is hidden deep within ourselves. So any time we want to move to a higher conscious and to reveal something which was naturally not revealed, we do this over wine. But the wine must be kosher, because just like wine reveals, non-kosher wine obstructs and encrusts the heart, hardens the heart, and interferes with our emotional and spiritual selves. So we must make sure that the wine is kosher LaPesach, as well as if someone has non-Jewish workers, like a maid and so on and so forth, a babysitter or a guest that comes to their Shabbat, to their Yom Tov or even Shabbat table, or even if they're just having wine during the weekday, with a non-Jew could be coming in to clean, whatever it is, the wine has to be mevushal. It has to be cooked. Because any wine that's open, even if it's highest degree kosher and it's not mevushal, technically non-cooked wine is more preferable for kiddush because it has a better taste to it. But if we know that a non-Jew is going to participate in the Seder for whatever reason, and someone's going to come and clean, we have to make sure that the wine is mevushal. Because if it was opened, the Shalom brings that even if the non-Jew looks at it, it becomes not kosher. But all opinion says if they touch it, if they hold to it, they touch it, once it's open, the entire bottle is not kosher. So we've got to make sure that the wine is kosher, and if need be, it's mevushal as well. And it's always a good measure to have mevushal wine, just in case you don't know who's coming in. Okay, so the first step is kadesh, to sanctify, to make kiddush. Now this kiddush is very different than all the other night kiddushim that for Shabbat and other Yom Tovim, because over here each person fills out an entire cup of wine. It has to be at least the medium opinion is between 2.9 floric ounces to 3.2 to 3.8 floric ounces, but you need to have a revi'it, what's called a fourth. Each person must have this. Men and women together, and the children. Children obviously have grape juice. Older children, you could start mixing grape juice and wine, and over bar mitzvah is preferable over wine. They could have less alcohol, lesser alcohol wine, like a 4%, 5% wine, but it's preferable to have wine over grape juice. And this is all the entire year. It's always preferable to make kiddush over wine than grape juice. If a person cannot have wine, like if they're recovering from alcoholism or everything, they don't have to have wine. So they have over grape juice. If a person's diabetic, there are other juices they can make over. They'll speak to the local Orthodox rabbi. But nevertheless, the first step is each person pours for themselves. Some tradition have it that each person pours for the other person. But nevertheless, each person takes a cup of wine. By Kiddush, everybody stands up. And the father makes, or the father makes, or if there's no father, the mother can make, or the brother can make, or the sister can make. If a person's living by themselves, they make it on their own. Some tradition, some people like to each, like when we have the table is flanked by several families. Each father makes kiddush for themselves. Some bachrim, some students like to make kiddush for themselves. Each their tradition, but nevertheless, each person rises up. We make kiddush. Then when we sit down, we must drink most of the cup in one sip. Most of the cup. In other words, we don't drink a little bit, in order to fulfill the mitzvah, as it is a mitzvah to have 4 cups throughout the night. In order to fulfill this, you need to drink most of the cup. And if possible, in one sip. Men do this while leaning to the left, leaning over, in order to show luxury, like we're princes and kings, as kings and princes when they have their feast. In the old traditional times, they would sit and lean on a pillow. And we lean to the left because our Talmudic sages explain, so we won't choke. They're explained that we have both the esophagus and the trachea, and we need to avoid that the drinks should come down into the trachea. So we lean to the left and not to the right. Okay, so that's the technical aspect of the first step. But as we mentioned before, the word kadesh, to sanctify, comes from the word kadosh. Why is it that this is the first of 15 steps? As we said, each step in itself is an agent to take us out of our own slavery. Why is Kadesh the first step? Well, we know that Kadesh comes from the word Kodesh, which means holy, set aside. On the first step in ability to get out of our slavery, or whatever situation, is take a step back. Because many times when we're so involved, we become tunnel vision. We lose track, we lose focus. Step number 1 is take a step backwards within your own mind. Be present in the moment. In other words, take a step back from the hectic cleaning and the preparation and the date and all the stresses that we occurred. We need to be very focused in the meal. For this, I advise that even those who are not able, as of yet, to stay away from electricity on Shabbat and Yom Tov, I nevertheless advise to put your phones away. Don't bring your phones to the Seder. Not for pictures, not for anything. Be present. I was actually speaking to my oldest son yesterday in Israel. It's funny. He was saying he made a decision a year ago not to take pictures for different things and the vacation and it's very interesting because we learned this a few years ago that Hasidus explains that why do people need to take these pictures is because the animal soul is afraid maybe I'm going to forget, but at the same time in taking a picture, you're not present in that moment. You're not present. You're trying to get the perfect angle of this. You're not present in the moment. And how much more so if it's not just for pictures, it's WhatsApp updates and this. Put the phones away. Be very present. Take a step back from your life and engage the vehicle which is called the Seder table. Take a step back from all your challenges. Be very present. Let go of all your calculations. What he said, she said. Be very present. Let go of all your calculations because Pesach is about transcendence. We can't transcend if we're holding down to anchors of mindful incongruence, emotional incongruence. We can't. And so whatever happened until the Seder, let go. Be very focused on, I'm here. We get to do this for Baruch Hashem for 3,337th time almost, I think. This is incredible. Or 36th time. It's incredible.
What do you mean, whatever happened in the Seder, let go?
In other words, there are many stresses in preparing for Pesach. After all, it's also weekdays, so people go to work. And so people might be stressed out and this and that. Let go of that. Don't bring any of that to the Seder table. It's because we said before that the Arizal says that in order to really achieve what we're looking to achieve in the Pesach, especially the Seder, we have to let go of the calculation. We have to be very involved, very joyous, very uplifted, and so on and so forth. There's another point, a deeper point. What is slavery? As we mentioned before, slavery is becoming an object. A slave is an object to their master. Their will doesn't matter. Their thoughts don't matter. Their emotions certainly matter. They don't have choice. They're told what to do, whether it's a benefit for them or not for their benefit at all. It doesn't matter. You're nothing more than an object. We do whatever we want to you. One must, on Kaddish, comes immediately, and we sing Kiddush, very interesting. Vatiten lanu Hashem Elokeinu moadim simcha chagim uzmanim b'sason et yom chag Pesach hazeh zman cheruteinu, and you're giving us Hashem, our Hashem, our Lord, occasions to rejoice, etc., etc. Hasidus points out a very interesting point. We say in the Kiddush, Vatiten lanu Hashem Elokeinu, and you should give us Hashem our God. And we go on to say, days, times of rejoicing, etc. But our sage, our Hasidic masters pose that, what are you giving us? Vatiten lanu, what are you giving us? Hashem Elokeinu. Hashem Yud-Kei Vav-Kei Elokeinu. To become our strength, the name of God, the transcendent name of Hashem, Hashem embedded within each and every one of us. We have the Yud, as Yat Rabbi explains in Tanya, within our own spiritual consciousness. Actually, when it says we'll make human, when God says in the book of Bereshit, let us make man in our image, Chassidus explains that what is in our image? In the image of the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. The Yud, the Vav is the body, the Hey is the arms, and the last Hey is the legs. So we have Yud-Kei Vav-Kei within ourselves. And so Vatiten lanu Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem gave us and embedded Himself within ourselves. That each one of us has a pintele yid, a chelek elokami ma'amamish, an actual part of God within ourselves, piece of infinity. Many times we become enslaved because we become disconnected from that piece of infinity, and we become very conscious of the world and the world around us and our own personal world, olam milashon ha'elam, concealment. And we become so attached to the limitations of the world and the fragmentations of the world and the different chaoses in the world and within our own personal world, that we forget the truth of who we are, and we become enslaved by our world. We become anxious, angry, despondent, sad, addicted. And sometimes addicted to the anxiety, to the anger, to the despondency, to the sadness. Because we forget who we are. And we start losing ourselves and our purpose in the world. Right before we went out of Egypt, when you think about this point, we are created beings. And a created being, by definition, cannot have liberty because it was created for a certain purpose. So it cannot be something else. For example, whoever created this book, this Siddur cannot be a Gemara, a Talmud. It cannot be a self-help book. It's not the Tanya. This is a Siddur. It can't change itself. Whoever created it with a purpose, with a designation. That's what it's going to be. So technically, we don't have liberty because we're created. Everything that's created has a designation, it has a limitation, it has its strengths and its weaknesses, etc., etc. Especially that we know that Hashem created the world, Baruch Shamar v'haya olam, blessed is He, and the world who said, and the world came to be. That Hashem creates the world through speech, and speech is very static. When we say let there be a book, then this book cannot be a light. Because we said book, we didn't say light. Yes, a book could illuminate through learning, but it's not a light bulb. It can't be a flower. It has a created designation. Well, what about us? Can we be truly liberated? This is when, right before we went out of Egypt, Hashem called us B'ni B'chori Israel, my firstborn Israel. What does that mean, my firstborn? Just like the firstborn child, the firstborn son, has the essence of his parents embedded within himself, so too we have the essence of Hashem embedded within ourselves. We came out of Egypt, before we came out of Egypt, we are a nation of tribes. We are Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. Israel is Yaakov. His name was changed to Israel. Changed to Israel. And Bnei Israel means the children of Israel. Means the children of Yaakov. Yaakov have 12 sons. They made to their 12 tribes, and therefore we have 12 tribes. So before Pesach, before we went out of Egypt, we were tribes. We weren't one cohesive nation. Incidentally, that's why when Moshe came the first time to Paro to say, let my people go, etc., Paro says to Moshe, let your people are free. You're Levi. Levi are not. We're never, as we learned before, Levi were never subjected to slavery. They were living as free as they wanted to be. And Paro said, your people are free. Go back to Goshen. You have waterfront property in Egypt. Go. Nobody's holding you. You see, you came in freely. You can leave freely. Nobody's holding you guys. The other ones, well, they're different. You're not the same people. When we came out of Egypt, Hashem gave us Himself, embedded Himself into us, and made us one nation, a nation of oneness. In Kaddish, we have to connect and ask Hashem to help us connect to our inner selves throughout the night, to reveal who we really are. That in fact we're a holy soul with a body. We're not a body with a soul, as we're going to mention in tonight's meditation class, a difference between those two ways of looking at things. We're a soul with the body, and that's our true essence. And no matter what, as the previous Rebbe once, on the way of being sent to Kostroma from his imprisonment in 1927, he was sent to exile. And on the way, he delivered a sikha and said, you could arrest our bodies, but you can never arrest our souls. Because the soul is always infinite, and nothing takes away from infinity. No limitation could impose itself upon infinity. No sin could, God forbid, no downfall, no failure, as great as it may be, can take away from infinity. Infinity is infinite. When we tap into this infinite part of ourselves, we find true liberations and infinite strength. When a person says, I'm done, it means that it's not them, it's their animal soul, it's their Yetzirah, because the godly soul is infinite. Nothing could ever weaken and deplete the strength of the godly soul. Nothing. So the first step and the intention of the night Kaddish to sanctify, to reveal the holiness of who you are, to allow you to connect to your true self, in order that past the Seder and into Pesach, and we draw day by day, and especially after Pesach, and for the rest of the year, we'll be tapped into ourselves to be able to be liberated, think liberated, speak and do liberated. Otherwise, we walk around as slaves. Slaves to what? To our past, to the traumas. I was sitting with somebody yesterday in the afternoon, and his wife has a very difficult time saying, I love you, because she was never told this as a child. And she says, I know he needs it, but I can't, it doesn't feel right for me. I said, right for you? Who's you? Who's you that it doesn't feel? You're his wife. This is what he needs from you. Yeah, but I know, but I can't, I could say it, but I don't mean it. That's slavery. Or last week, I was sitting with a guy, and he screams nonstop at his children. And I said, you can't scream, you can't raise your voice like that. You just can't, it's not right. He said, what can I do? This is the way I was raised, I can't help myself. I can't, I wish. That's a slavery. What do you mean you can't? What does it mean you can't? Of course you can, the real you can. The external, the incrustation part of you, that's not you. That's the crust, that's the animal soul. That's not the real you. Step number 1 is Kaddish. To become removed from the day-to-day mundane setting, and all the stresses that came thus far. And that's why we make it over wine, because, as we said before, the wine, nichnas yain yoseh sod. Just like wine is derived from a grape, that the juice is embedded in the fiber of the grape in itself, but it needs to be squeezed. So too within ourselves we have holiness. It just needs to be brought out. That's why we make it over wine. So when we drink the wine, we think to ourselves, Hashem, please allow me to reveal my true self. Now, no matter what happened until now, that I might have not known who I was. I wasn't sure. But with this, I'm able to connect and help me to connect to my true self, and bring this holiness in every aspect of my life. Step number 2, Urchatz, and wash. Kaddish Urchatz. What is the washing? Unlike the rest of the year, where immediately after we make Kiddush, we go to the sink and we wash our hands for Netilat Yadayim, make a bracha, make hamotzi lachem min haaretz for the bread. This is very different. Over here, we go to and wash our hands, or some people have a custom that they bring the washing cup and the bowl to the table and they wash for each other. Our custom in Chabad, that we go to the sink, we do it on our own. But there's a very big discrepancy. We do not make a bracha al netilat yadayim after washing. We pick up the washing cup with our right hand, give it to our left hand. If you're righty, if you're a lefty, you reverse that, and we position our hands in such a way. A lot of people mistakenly put their hands like this or like this, but the water has to saturate every part from the wrist all the way to the fingers. So we keep our hands like this, that way, and we go like this: 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. In order that the water should encompass and touch every single part. And then with the third time, we cup our hands a little bit, we keep some of the water, and then now the difference over here, we do not make out an Netilat Yadayim, because we're not making a motzi right now. This Netilat Yadayim comes from the halacha that deals with Tumah and Tahara, spiritual impurity and spiritual purity. That in the times, where spiritual purity and spiritual impurity was just as relevant as kosher, not kosher is today. In other words, at the times of the Mishkan or the tabernacle, or subsequently the holy temples, if somebody was impure, there were certain things that they could not, certain areas they could not go into in the Beit HaMikdash, or certain services they could not participate. We know that our hands, when we touch things, it could transfer tumah. So today, when we don't have the Beit Hamikdash, nevertheless, there's still tumah and tahara, but not as openly relevant, quote unquote, as it is in the Beit Hamikdash. Nevertheless, it's very, very essentially important to Judaism. The tradition is that we do not touch wet vegetables before we wash our hands. If we're going to touch wet vegetable, because water transfers tumah. So if we're going to touch a vegetable with wet hands, or the vegetable itself is wet, we make the Netilat Yadayim without a bracha. Now, why are we washing hands? Because the next step, karpas, is we're going to take a vegetable and we're going to dip it in salt water. We're going to speak about this in a second. But nevertheless, over here, we wash our hands 3 times, and it's advisable for the one who's conducting the Seder to announce before we wash our hands, and if there's a long line waiting to wash, also during the line, go to the kitchen and announce, make sure not to say the bracha. Don't say Netilat Yadayim. Just remain silent.
Rabbi, you mean like right before you wash your hands, don't touch the wet vegetables. Obviously, whoever's preparing the Seder has to touch the
Yes, but before we partake of it. Very interesting, because if a person does make a bracha, the halacha is mistakenly. If a person does make a bracha mistakenly on Netilat Yadayim, they technically need to go and immediately make hamotzi lachem min haaretz and shekidishan b'mitzav sivan al achilat matzah. These 2 blessings, and you skip the bulk of the seder. When you think, okay, so we're saving time, this is not advisable, because each step, as we said, is absolutely mandatory and relevant in order to achieve what we're looking for. That's why it's called seder, order. There's a very precise order over here.
Everybody has to, or just that person skip?
No, just a person who made the bracha. Okay. And that would be awkward if the one who's conducting the Seder now has to go to Motzi and okay, somebody else has to take over. Or whatever. Let's look at the deeper aspect of it. Our hands, as we know, are is enclosed with 3 garments. The garments of thought, the capacity to think and process reality, to connect between our inner selves and the world, to process the world, to take in the data. The garment of speech, the capacity to communicate, and the garment of action, of deed, the capacity to deal with the world, because the soul in itself is a piece of God. It's way beyond any interaction with the physical world. In order to be able to relate to the world, Hashem creates a proxy, thought, speech, and action. The garment of action is the furthest away, the most external of the garment. The garment of thought is the most intrinsic, is one with us. The garment of speech is united with us. That's why speech is audible so long as it's united with a person, but it focuses outwards. And the garment of an action altogether is to make something outside of you. And that's why your hands are the furthest away from your body. Our hands also represent our emotions. Our primary emotions, chesed, the capacity for kindness and love and openness and malleability and in giving and so on and so forth. The left hand represents gvura, justice, the ability to focus, to be disciplined, to withhold, to close off, to walk away from something that's not good for you. When do the emotions function correctly? When they are when they're born and are maneuvered constantly by the mind. Mind governs the heart. But if the emotions act independently of the mind, then not only they're not congruent, they become toxic. So while chesed is the ability to be kind, to like, to love, to give, to be open, to be malleable, corrupted chesed, toxic chesed, is, as we learned, and we're going to learn during Sfirat HaOmer, is love, but selfish love. I love you because what you're doing for me. I love this quality about you. It means I love the part of you that makes me happy. And we spoke about it, so we'll speak about it, but it's corrupted. So gvura, instead of being disciplined, the person becomes judgmental. Instead of being focused, the person becomes anxious, angry, sad. All those are corrupted gvurot. Kadesh urchatz. It says Kadesh, step number 1, and wash. What do you mean and? And, when we put an and, means that it's in direct connection and correlated to what was said before. Kadesh urchatz means we have to wash our hands. What is washing our hands? Washing our hands, we take water. Water that's contained in a vessel. We can't just wash our hands by turning on the sink and putting our hands 3 times. Rather, the water has to be poured with one manual strength. Incidentally, for whatever reason, this shouldn't happen during the Seder, but incidentally, just parenthetically, if a person finds themselves in a place where they don't have a washing cup, you don't have to have one. You can use a normal cup so long as it's round on the top and is able to contain the amount of water you need to wash altogether. And there's no spigots, so it's completely round, so the water could evenly pour in one shot. And if you don't have a cup, you could just, for whatever reason, you could just turn on the faucet 3 times. Each time, considered 1, 2, and 3, and 1, 2, and 3. But nevertheless, what is the thought behind it? What is the mystical aspect of it? Water is connected to wisdom and to kindness as it pours downwards. When we wash our hands with a cup, it means contained water, contained wisdom. The inner thought is, I'm drawing intellect back to oversee and command my emotions. We're not cleaning our hands. It's not to clean. We don't wash our hands to clean. Because if our hands are dirty before Netilat Yadayim, if there are any specks or anything that are considered our partition, like a ring or something that could be removed, like a piece of dirt that got stuck, we have to first remove the rings before washing our hands. We first have to remove anything that's attached. If we can, we have to remove it. In other words, false nails don't have to be removed. If a person has a band-aid that they cannot remove because it's going to create an infection, they don't have to remove it. But anything else, if it's a dirt or something, it has to be removed before Netilat Yadayim, because otherwise, the water, as we said before, has to completely saturate. If there's any partition, any interruption between the water and the skin, it's not considered Netilat Yadayim. So we're not washing to be clean, we're cleansing our emotions over here. We're cleansing our emotions and drawing intellect into each side.
Is that just for the man or the
Both women and men. And that's the thought. That's why it's one of the steps. Because in order to become liberated, we must be able to be emotionally congruent with ourselves. And when is that? When the mind rules and governs the heart. So we take the mindset that we realize in Kaddish, how holy we are, how illuminescent we are, and we draw that upon the emotions. All right, and now we go to step number 3. Again, I'm advising that before we go to Netilat Yadayim, and during, if there's a long line, let everybody do not make a bracha. Step number 3, each one of us takes the wet vegetable, the vegetable on the ke'ara. As we mentioned yesterday, I will put pictures of how the ke'ara should look, because the ke'ara, the Pesach plate, the food has exact positioning. We don't just put the 6 types of food just randomly on the plate. Each food corresponds to an attribute, to a divine attribute. As we mentioned last week, there are 3 matzot. Each one should be faced upwards, in between 3 different partitions. And on top of the matzot, we place a Seder plate, very gently, so we don't crack the matzot. And the matzot have to, and the food have to be positioned exactly. Altogether, we have 10 items on the Pesach ke'ara. We have 3 matzot, 1 plate. The plate is actually considered to be part and parcel of the Seder experience, and the foods. We have 10 altogether, corresponding to the 10 divine soul power, the attributes, 10 soul powers, etc., etc. At this point, we move to karpas. Each one takes a small piece of the vegetables. Some people have potato, some people have an onion, some people have a leek, but it has to be a vegetable that grows on the ground. And we dip it into salt water, and we each make the bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam borei pri hadama, who creates the fruit of the ground. We have in mind to also include in it the other foods from the ground that we're going to be eating later on, the maror, etc. Yeah, what's the question?
I want to know, before we start anything, like the Persians, they have a custom of eating appetizer. Is that allowed? We shouldn't eat anything unless we do nothing.
Seder is very direct.
So before Seder,
No.
we don't eat nothing?
No.
We just sit and start.
You shouldn't start immediately. You could eat food on Erev Pesach, just not any of the food that it was used part of the mitzvah for the Seder plate.
No, not that. Like other appetizers.
No, nothing.
They shouldn't eat anything.
Nothing. This is every single step, including the eating, is one of the steps is eating the meal. And we're going to see what the depth of it is. But each step in itself is relevant. We can't mix
Nuts, any fruit.
nothing.
Wow.
So we make the hadama, we dip into the salt water, we make hadama, and we eat a drop of it. We don't eat more than an ounce of it. It's very important. We just eat a piece. We don't start sitting down and eating. We eat a small piece because otherwise there's a question for bracha chola. We eat less than a kazait, less than an olive, the weight of an ancient olive, which is around 1.1 ounces. The inner dimension of karpas, the word karpas, is an acronym for Samech Parich. 60, alluding to the 60, Samech Parich is 60 parich, 60 of breaking labor, alluding to the 600,000 men who were forced to work breaking labor in Egypt. As we mentioned before, the breaking labor means that that it broke them. It broke their spirit. It broke their inner identity to the point that only 80% remained in Egypt. Because in order to come out, you need to know who you are, that you are truly are liberated. Because if the person starts believing that they're broken and they're this, they can never come out. They end up in broken relationships and broken jobs and it's not that they're broken, but they're assuming that they're broken themselves, and therefore they never try to improve and get out of themselves. Samech parich, we dip the vegetable, the ground vegetable has to come from the ground because our bodies derive from the ground. The name Adam, as we're going to be speaking about in tonight's class, it comes from Adam for two ways. Adam comes because our bodies came from the Adama, from the ground. On the higher level, Adamele Elyon, I will liken myself to the supernal. In other words, we have our bodies, although they come from the lowest, have the capacity to achieve the highest. The physical has the highest ability to specifically God's desire to inhabit the lowliest of low is not that the soul should be somewhere in the spiritual realms and awe and this. God wants that the soul will activate the power of the body for holiness. But sometimes in order to do this, when a person becomes so subjugated by their ego, it's very difficult to connect to your soul. It's very difficult to bring that soul to the physical realm. So, as we mentioned in our previous class, that the Egyptian slavery was very, very much part of our destiny. That 430 years before our Exodus, Hashem already told Avraham Avinu that your children, when Hashem made a covenant with Avraham and chose him to be Avraham Avinu, Hashem told him that your descendants are going to descend into a foreign land and they're going to be enslaved and afflicted there. The slavery, the Egyptian slavery was part and parcel of our destiny, as we mentioned before, that it metamorphosized us. It humbled us so much in order that when we came out, we'll receive the Torah, which is derived from God's infinite mind and infinite desire, will. And so in order to receive this truly magnificent, infinite revelation, the Torah, we need to be empty vessels. We need to be very humble. And so for that, Hashem put us through the humbling experience of Egypt, of the slavery. Because slavery humbled us so much, and when we're humble, we're able to receive everything. The inner thoughts, as we dip the soul, the body, the vegetable into the salt water represents the tears. Tears purify the person, cleanses the person. In that moment, we should have in mind whatever humbling experience I had Whatever I went through this year, my family went through, Bnei Israel went through. Obviously, we know no evil falls from Hashem, God forbid. No negativity, it's all positive. But sometimes it's so overwhelming for us, Hashem. Nevertheless, we know it's for our own benefit. So the mindset should be, and this is the openings of Pesach to transcend, because what holds us down usually is, I can't believe this happened to me. I can't believe it didn't happen. I can't believe he said it. I can't believe he did. Why me? Why me? That's what holds us down. That's what paralyzes us. We have to start opening. Hashem, everything you gave me this year and the year before, and everything I went through, my family in Israel, I know it's good. I know you've prepared us. You've subjected our physical bodies to purifying agents, and it wasn't easy. But I'm open, Hashem. I want to see what help me connect it in a rightful manner. Help me see, help me experience the revelation that was meant to occur because of this. Because anytime we go through a difficult period, a humbling period, is because Hashem wants to raise us up exponentially. And there's no way to rise up if we're just being held down. So by your own ideology, by your own mindsets, by your own incongruencies, and so on and so forth. So sometimes Hashem has to put us through humbling experiences so we will let go of all of that and be able to be risen upwards. And that moment we can have in mind whatever difficulties, and I say, Hashem, I'm ready for the next stage of this. I'm letting go. I know you had the best in mind for me. I know all this happened for a good reason. I'm ready to let go of all my incongruency now that I washed my hands and my emotions are open, now that I've tapped into my soul. Now I'm ready to experience this, as we know that the entire purpose of Egypt was just a prelude to receiving the Torah, becoming Hashem's chosen nation, and go to the land of Israel. All of the preceding galut, exile, with all those difficulties and pains and so on and so forth, was just, as Yat Rebbe explains, one long preparation to receive the ultimate revelation of Mashiach, an infinite world, that the world in itself will act infinitely, openly, and we'll see God openly with our own eyes. The same thing we have to have on a personal level. Hashem, I've been through this, and now I'm asking you I'm open, I'm ready to move forward. The next step is yachatz, the breaking. We split. Yachatz means to split. The next step number 4, we break the middle matzah. As we know, the Ke'ara has 3 matzot. Optimally, one should have a Pesach matzah cover, which has 3 compartments in it. One for the bottom matzah, one for the middle matzah, one for the top. If one, for whatever reason, does not have this, they could make a makeshift one. We could put a plate, we put a matzah, and then we put a napkin on top of one matzah, and then a second matzah, and then a third, and then a napkin on top of the second matzah, and a third, and a napkin over that. There's a reason why we have 3 matzot on a legal level, because one matzah, as we're going to see, we break in half in order to fulfill the commandment to have our Seder over lechem oni, poor man's bread. We described poor man's bread last week. Poor people could not afford a whole loaf, so they have pieces of loaf. Like the Germans gave us small pieces of bread. Like the Egyptians fed us small pieces of matzot as daily rations, just to enough to keep us going, but not enough to invigorate us and enough to give us stomach issues and so on and so forth. So we have over poor man's bread on the legal level, that is. And also we need the other 2 matzot, because we need to make hamotzi as every single meal, Yom Tov and Shabbat meal, we have to have a double 2 loaves, 2 whole loaves. So we need 3 matzot. We need the 2 whole matzot for hamotzi and achilat matzah, and 1 matzah to break in order to fulfill the tradition of having a Seder over poor man's bread. As we mentioned last week, the 3 matzot correspond to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The 3 matzot also corresponds to Kohen, Levi, and Israel. On a deeper level, the 3 matzot corresponds to Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferet, or Chochmah, Bina, and Dat. It's very interesting because the word matzah, the 3 matzot, Kohen, Levi, and Israel, the acronym of Kohen, Levi, and Israel spelled out Kli, vessel. Kohen is Kaf, Levi is Lamed, and Yud is, Israel is Yud. Kli, vessel. Now these are the vessels. That's why we position them. If they're curved, we position the curve upwards in order to receive. We break the middle matzah, which corresponds to Yitzchak, which corresponds to Levi, and both Yitzchak and Levi corresponds to the attribute of Gvura, of justice. Avraham and Kohen correspond to Chesed. Yaakov corresponds to Tiferet. So Yaakov is equal to Israel. Tiferet is a synergy. And Yitzchak and Levi is Gvurot. And that's, Gvurot is where the contraction happens in creation. And so we break the middle matzah. The smaller piece remains inside the matzah bag. And again, to fulfill the Seder over lechem oni, of a poor man's bread. The bigger piece is taken and divided into, some people just put the bigger piece aside. By Chabad custom, we break the bigger piece into 5 parts to correspond to the 5 contractions. And is set aside for the afikoman. For the afikoman, which as we spoke about last week, corresponds to the Korban Pesach, which we eat all the way at the end, right before benching. We must, it's a mitzvah, and we must eat the afikoman at the end of the Seder, before benching. The first night, by the way, we have to finish, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, around 1:12. That's around midnight, or 12:54, around that time. I'm going to put the exact date, but it has to be before the Jewish midnight. Second night, you have all night long. Anyway, but it must be eaten. So now, at this point, we either break the matzah into 5 parts, or we keep it, but the father stores away the afikoman for the end of the night. Some customs, the father hides it, and the children steal it. And being that it's an absolute and intricate, mandatory part of the Seder to eat the afikoman, and especially the first night by a certain time, the father now goes to the children and says, I know you have it, let's negotiate. If you give it back to me, I will give you a prize. What do you want? The aim for that is to keep the children awake as long as possible, obviously. You want them to be excited. Okay, we're waiting. We're going to get something. But there's a question over here. And this is a holy minhag, by the way. This is not just they made it up as a game. Any minhag that is accepted by the wide body of the Jewish people and has a holy source is a holy minhag. By Chabad, we don't encourage the kids to steal the matzah. We actually incentivize the children by having them, negotiating that they'll stay by the Seder table as long as possible, that they'll ask Hamanishtanah, they'll ask questions, they'll participate, share their own their stories, Dvar Torah if they have. But nevertheless, we incentivize for the positive. But nevertheless, there is a holy minhag of steal. Why? Why do we? The night that we said the entire night is to transmit tradition, to educate, to inaugurate our children into Judaism. We're teaching them to steal and gain something back from it. Is there such a law that a person could steal and says, okay, I'll give it back to you, but you have to pay me for it? No such law. So how does this work over here? But rather, this actually goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu's back and forth with Paro. That we see that each and every one of the times that Moshe confronted Paro throughout that 1 year, from the beginning, when Hashem sent Moshe to Paro, not even once did Moshe mention to Paro that we're permanently leaving. That the Jewish people en masse are all going to leave permanently Egypt. For each and every one of the times that Moshe discussed this with Paro, Moshe repeated what God told him to say. A 3-day journey. We're only going for 3 days. To the extent, as we learned about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, when we were 3 days out of Egypt, Paro found out that we ran away. We asked, what do you mean we found it? He threw us out. But Paro was fully expecting us to come back after our 3rd day. Because that's exactly what Moshe told them. Why didn't Moshe tell them the truth, that we're leaving permanently? Now, technically, the sage says, well, he didn't say that we're not going forever. He said we're going for 3 days. Forever includes 3 days as well. So it's not technically a lie. However, why wasn't Moshe just forthright? But the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya that the back and forth between Moshe and Paro was a back and forth between the two souls that we have, the godly soul and the animal soul. We know one thing, that the animal soul is never ready for change. It doesn't want change. It likes to be exactly. Unless change means more freedom for me, I don't want change. I don't want to have to work on myself. Anytime we want to work on a habit, to change the way we think, the way we speak, the worst thing we could tell ourselves is, I'm doing this forever. Because as soon as we say that the Yetzer Hara and the animal soul and the Yetzer Hara will put up such a fight, so much inner resistance, give us every reason, mindful reason, even holy reason to start employing, an emotional reason why I can't do this, why it's impossible. This is not just a time, I'm not ready for it, it's going to... How does one experience change then? In a healthy manner. This is exactly what Alter Rebbe explains, what Moshe did with Paro. Moshe knew that if he tells Paro we're leaving permanently, Paro will double down. As we see the very first time Moshe came to Paro and says, let my people go. What did Paro says? Let you go, you guys are just being lazy. You want freedom because you don't want to work. You know the solution for it? From now on, let the slaves find their own material to make their own bricks, and they have to make the same amount. And if not, they're going to be beaten. And that's going to teach them to get out of their laziness. As soon as Moshe said even one word, Paro already, as soon as you try to change anything, your Yetzer Hara immediately starts doubling down and putting all sorts of fronts, reasons, emotions, and this and this. Why not? How do you do them? Moshe knew that Paro will not refuse 3 days. 3 days is 3 days. That's why he told him 3 days. That's how we change. In AA, one of the best things, I spoke to someone in Narcotics Anonymous, I think we spoke about it here in the class, that it's 1 day at a time. You can't say I forever quit, because the Yetzer Hara won't allow you. You say, I'm doing it for the next 5 minutes. I'm doing it for the next day. I'm doing it for the next 2 days. That's it. 1 day at a time. And when that 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour or a day, okay, I did it for 1 day. I've demonstrated that I can. I'll try it for another day. Nachum Markowitz, the big Askan, who is a public activist in Crown Heights, very famous, a big philanthropist. Nachum, he said in a My Encounter video interview, you could watch it, when he came as a student to 770, I think in the 80s, I believe, he fell by the wayside and he started participating in extracurricular activities, some good and some not so good. But he became distracted from learning. He became distracted from learning, and to the point where he stopped learning altogether. And eventually he had a yichidut, a private audience with the Rebbe. And he asked the Rebbe, what do I do? The Rebbe said, forge for yourself 5 minutes a day. Make 5 minutes consistently the same time every day, and learn whatever you want. If it's Chumash and Rashi, it's Midrash, Chassidut, Tani, whatever you want. 5 minutes of holy learning. That's that. Commit to that. 5 minutes. And from time to time, increase by 10%. If Nachum thought to himself, 5 minutes, everybody else, my college, my students, my friends, they're learning 17, 18 hours a day. What's 5 minutes? But the Rebbe says, 5 minutes, consistently. He said a very quick time. Within a matter of months, he went to very deep and high learning again. He went back to the normal schedule. And if you want change, you begin with quantifiable. And so yes, freedom and liberty is not something that just will come to you. It's something that you've got to struggle for and something that you need to sometimes steal. Because the world will not give it to you. The world will only take from you. That's the custom of the children stealing, because this is, the Fikoman represents the Korban Pesach, our freedom. And Moshe sort of had to steal Paro's knowledge, his awareness. Gneivas Dad, he had to tell him a false, sort of something that would be misconstrued as false. God forbid. Nevertheless, we put the afikoman aside for the end of the night. Must be eaten. Do not forget. If someone benched before they eat afikoman, they must wash again and eat afikoman. After the eating afikoman, as we're going to see, we're not allowed to eat anything else. You're allowed to drink, but until the end, until you wake up the next morning, you're not allowed to eat. Because the taste of the afikoman, as we learned in the Sikha last week, in the Kabbalah of the wise son, must remain in your mouth, in your system. It should not be mixed with anything else. Because the afikoman represents the Korban Pesach, the ultimate agent of liberty. We break the middle matzah because, as the Kotzker Rebbe explains, Menachem of Kotzk, there's nothing more complete than a broken heart. What does that mean? Not Chaz v'Shalom, a person should feel broken. A broken heart means, as we learn in Tanya, that in the Zohar they say in the Academy of the Heavens, they teach that when a log is thrown into a fire and it doesn't catch fire, it's because it's too thick, it's too dense, so you need to splinter it in order for it to be able to be utilized correctly. So too, if a person feels that they can't get out of their day-to-day habits and their day-to-day rot and their sadness and incongruency, it's because sometimes they're too dense with their ego. The most incongruent thought and desire for success of any level, any proportion, is looking to be comfortable. So long as a person is comfortable in their settings, they'll never change. They'll never grow. They'll always remain the same. As I remember going and visiting prisons before Pesach, and I remember walking through the yard and seeing a new inmate who had just arrived, talking to his commanding officer. And I just walked by him. I heard him say, "Can I have a comfortable mattress?" And the commanding officer says, "For what?" He says, "Because if I'm going to be here for 9 years, I want to be comfortable." And I thought to myself, why would you want to be comfortable in such a setting? You're giving free cable television and a gym and this and computers and internet and a comfortable. Why would you want to come out of here? It's a trap for you. It's a Venus flytrap. You want to be comfortable there? So too, the greatest antithesis of our growth is our own comfort. And some people are comfortable with positive, and some people are comfortable with negative. But nevertheless, in breaking that, what Menachem Mendel of Kotzker Rebbe, the Kotzker Rebbe meant was nothing more complete than a broken heart, means not that I'm broken, God forbid, but knowing how much more I could achieve. If I'm open, if I'm humble, there's so much more to achieve, I can't even fathom it. Because all the achievement I had thus far was based on a very limited mindset, a very emotional aptitude. But if I'm humble and open, I'm able to receive and achieve so much more in this world. So when we break the middle matzah, have in mind that Hashem, I'm ready for more. I'm ready. I know that you've created me for a purpose, and a divine purpose, and this purpose, you want me to be happy and joyful and vibrant and be a good father, a good mother, a good this. I know, and I'm ready for it, Hashem. I'm ready to let go of my comfort zone. As a great lyricist, Leonard Cohen said in one of his last songs, forget your perfect offerings. Everything has a crack, and when that crack is where the light comes in. At that point, we break the middle matzah.